So how destructive is mining for lithium salts? Is it a really dirty process? I mean, it's an open cast mine, but do they just dynamite it, or get do they scrape the soil, and then how do they refine it? What's the process, and how messy is it?
Well, there's two main types of lithium mining. Well, three really, but the most popular one, I'll talk about the most popular one and then what's going to happen here. The most popular one is brine, lithium brine, and that's like lithium dissolved in water. And you find a lot of it in these dry lake beds, like underneath a dry lake bed, down in the groundwater underneath it. And so that's why so much lithium mining is in Chile and Argentina, where they have those, the Andean Altiplano, where they have all those, it's the Atacama Desert region. They have all these dry lake beds, high elevation. It's actually kind of similar to Nevada, because we're in the Great Basin here. There's a lot of dry lake beds. It's called the Great Basin because none of the rivers and streams flow to the ocean. They just flow into these basins and then evaporate. And so you get these dry lake beds, and lithium gets concentrated through that evaporation process. And so for brine lithium extraction, they go in and they drill down into the groundwater, they pump it out, and then they basically put it in these gigantic ponds, and they just let the sun bake down on it and evaporate the water out, and they end up with this concentrated lithium salt, a lithium rich salt. And then they take that and they refine it further in some sort of lab or factory setting. So that's not what's going to be happening here at Thacker Pass. This was an old lake bed, but that was millions of years ago. So there was lithium, there was that type of situation here. But now the lithium is in this clay soil. And so here they're planning to do an open pit mine. So they'll basically just, blow up and bulldoze and scoop out this entire place. It's about 28 square miles. I don't know the conversion to kilometers there, maybe 46 square kilometers or something in that ballpark, 50. It's a lot of land. It's a large area, and they'll just basically destroy that whole area. They'll scrape all the life off the topsoil. They'll dig down about almost 400 feet, so a 30-story building down into the ground. I don't know what that is in meters, 180 meters or something deep. And then they're going to refine it. So they'll take what they dig out. The lithium in the soil is only about 2,000 parts per million here. So to end up with 1 ton of lithium, you need to extract 500 tons of soil. So it's not very concentrated. They take all the clay and they bring it down to this factory they're planning to build right here on the same site. And then they use a process with huge amounts of sulfuric acid to, basically separate out the different minerals in that clay. And so they'll use water. They're going to use 4 million gallons of water a day. That's in liters. That's roughly 16 million liters a day. My understanding is basically they take the sulfuric acid, they take hot water, they combine it, they put the clay into it, and then they just agitate it and shake it up. And lithium is a very light element. It's the third element on the periodic table. So it'll separate out, like physically, as that settles, you'll get the heavier sediments will sink to the bottom and the lithium will rise more to the top. And then they can scrape that off, and then they'll purify it further using, I don't know what methods. But this sulfuric acid process is pretty interesting because sulfuric acid is one of the most important industrial chemicals in use all around the world today. It's very widely used by heavy industry. And almost all of it comes from the oil and gas industry. It's a byproduct of refining oil and gas. Most countries have set regulations that say, gasoline has to have low sulfur because of acid rain. right, to keep acid rain in check. And so they pull the sulfur out of the oil and gas at the refinery, and then they just end up with this giant pile of sulfur, and they sell it to other uses. So some of that goes to the fertilizer industry, and some of it goes to make sulfuric acid for this type of chemical process. So what's also interesting too is, I'm sure you all are familiar with the tar sands in Canada. Tar sands fuels have 11 times as much sulfur in them as conventional heavy crude oil. So, tar sands still make up a big portion of the oil that's refined on this continent. And you've got literal mountains of sulfur building up at the tar sands. And then they sell that back to other industries. And that's actually a pretty big economic support for the tar sands industry. There have been some studies that have shown that if there wasn't a market for that sulfur, then the tar sands wouldn't be as profitable as they are today, and the industry would be smaller. It would have to contract. So it's just ironic that this supposedly green mine, they keep calling it a green mine that's going to save the planet through electric vehicles, has this very direct link to oil and gas refining. And it's not a small amount of sulfur they're going to bring in. It's thousands of tons per day. If any of you have been to New York City, or you're familiar with the Empire State Building, basically imagine 2 Empire State Buildings. That's how much sulfur they're going to bring in every single year.
And what happens to the runoff? Do they recycle the water and the sulfuric acid, or does it just drain away?
Well, that depends on who you ask, right? The mining company would love for everyone to believe that it will be incredibly clean. There will be no spills or leaks. There will be basically no air pollution coming out of the mine. And that doesn't seem like it's going to be true. So they've got some different plans in terms of recycling the water that they're going to be using, but they're also going to have a giant tailings pond for the water. They're going to be digging these pits basically where they put the water in there that's all contaminated, and they just let it evaporate. And so then what's left behind is like dust, basically, with all the heavy metals and the uranium and arsenic and other contaminants in that. And then they basically just build up a big pile of that, and they bulldoze some other dirt over it and put a big plastic sheet underneath it at the end, and then they just leave. That's the plan, basically. And the engineers will tell you, oh, it's very safe, we've got this great plan, it's going to be amazing. It basically seems to me like they're deliberately going to leave a toxic mess behind, and deliberately bury this giant piece of plastic in the soil, which I don't know about where you all are at, but around here, if you throw a plastic bottle outside your window or something, you get a fine, right? You get a ticket. But the mining company, they get a tax break for this plan to leave behind a giant toxic dump. So it's just, the double standard is strong here.